Depending on the relative abundances of these isotopes, you can run a fingerprint and figure out what has happened on that planet, especially as far as nuclear things, because of the xenon. And as I found out when I was investigating this finally, I started out investigating the dark secrets of Mars, and I ended up finding the dark secrets of Earth. Yes, I learned things about the human race that I'd rather not have learned.
These pictures tell you everything you need to know about what's at Cydonia Mensa. If you see on a planet that used to be Earth-like, a carved human face and a pyramid within 5 kilometers of each other, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what this all means. You can connect the dots. What do we know about Mars? We know that a planet that was once thought to be lifeless, dry, and dead is in fact more similar to Earth. In fact, in the last couple of decades, scientists changed their mind about Mars drastically. Today we know that Mars was something like a second Earth, millions of years ago when our solar system was much younger. Experts have found that in the distant past, Mars and the massive oceans of liquid water, lakes, rivers, and atmosphere that was eerily similar to that of Earth today. But what about life? What about advanced life? Is there any possibility that Mars was inhabited by advanced alien civilizations in the distant past? If there's just a slight possibility that Mars was home to advanced beings, wouldn't these beings have created structures, monuments, and similar buildings like we did on Earth? If they did, is there any chance that we found such structures on Mars today?
The human race has been arming itself to the teeth for a big nuclear war since 1945. And the way we know that is because of this Xenon-129, because of the testing of nuclear weapons and the production of plutonium. It was recently revealed that the areas where the radioactive activity occurs, here's Utopia, here's Matter as a Daily, is covered with a peculiar glass called trinitite. It's found at the nuclear test site, and it's formed by a nuclear fireball above a desert. So, I did a terrible thing. I went to a conference and presented this. Went to Houston last year and presented all of this evidence. And I was looking for some brave soul to come up to me and say, Brandenburg, you've got this wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Or something like of that nature. Instead, there was stunned silence when I showed everybody this. Finally, one of them asked me, did they do it to themselves or did somebody else do it? That is the big question now. These explosions on Mars were not natural. There is no known natural phenomenon that could have caused these effects, turning thousands of square miles of Martian surface into molten glass, spreading radioactivity all the way around the planet, filling the atmosphere with isotopic residues of a fast neutron reaction like a bomb, and irradiating the surface with neutrons. This apparently happened about 250 million years ago, long time before the human race was around. There weren't even dinosaurs around when this happened. So, when we first found this, we reported it to the Pentagon. I was working closely with the Pentagon at the time. I showed it also to nuclear weapons experts that I worked with, and they agreed with me that my interpretation was correct. They can't be quoted publicly, unfortunately. And the US government, 6 months later, sent back word to me and said, publish. Yes, very strange.
Their mission was to look for traces of life and obtain high-resolution images of Mars, and to study the composition of the Martian atmosphere. Curiously, as the Viking 1 spacecraft was orbiting the red planet, it spotted a strange structure on the surface of Mars. A massive 2-mile-long face was spotted in the so-called Cydonia region of Mars, leaving experts in total confusion. NASA even had a press conference to announce the discovery. Dr. John Brandenburg is one of the most important scientists who has spoken about Mars, the structures on Mars, and alien life on the red planet. Dr. Brandenburg worked on numerous scientific projects and also worked for the government. Brandenburg was the deputy manager of the Clementine mission to Moon, which discovered water at the Moon's poles in 1994. Currently, Brandenburg works as a consultant to Morningstar Applied Physics. Speaking about the structures on the surface of Mars, Dr. Brandenburg said, "Someone complained to me, 'John, why do you have to bring Cydonia into this?' And I said, because I can read a map. Here's what's at Cydonia Mensa. There's the face on Mars. There's the D&M pyramid. Here it is, the second shot. This was taken July 25th. This was taken 30 days later. And the government was apparently doing a follow-up investigation. These two pictures tell you everything you need to know about what's at Cydonia Mensa. If you see on a planet that used to be Earth-like, a carved human face and a pyramid within 5 kilometers of each other, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what this all means. You can connect the dots. I mean, sometimes I can tell you as a scientist, and I've seen other scientists do this. If you're concerned, you're just phrasing it out. You hold up a picture of a buffalo and insist that it's a dog."
Now, what is the significance of 2 explosion sites, one in Mare Acidalium and one here in Utopia? They're both in the north, both over what used to be the dried ocean bed. But if you look on Mars, the prevailing winds, which send the strongest shock waves, and also the fallout, would have all gone here from this large one to a place called Cydonia Mensa. And the next one the smaller one would have gone here to a place called Galaxias Chaos. It's a long forgotten art nowadays, and with everybody with GPS and iPhones, I said, but I actually read maps. Here's what's at Cydonia Mensa. There's the face on Mars. There's the D&M pyramid discovered by DePieter and Molinar. Here it is in a second shot. This was taken July 25th. This was taken 30 days later. The government was apparently doing a follow-up investigation. These 2 pictures tell you everything you need to know about what is Cydonia Mensa. If you see on a planet that used to be Earth-like a carved human face and a pyramid within 5 kilometers of each other, and this thing looks like some kind of other kind of ruin in between, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what this all means. You can connect the dots.
NASA and scientists around the globe have spoken out about aliens and how they expect we will discover signs of extraterrestrial life in the next 20 years or so. However, many people believe these statements are mere preparation for a disclosure movement that is going to change everything we believed about mankind, our origin, and life in the universe. This article is off of Ancient Code. I'll give this, just check it out. We'll give it in the description below. And then I'm going to just check out this about 10-minute audio piece that I've taken from an interview I did with Dr. John Brandenburg, talking about the life and death on Mars, the new Mars synthesis. And this was about 5 or 6 years ago. I did this interview with him off of Cryptic Knowledge Radio. But just let me know what you think, comments below. And here is the interview, a few pieces that I did with John Brandenburg.
And so let me put it this way. I was very interested in Mars, and it was a very strange set of events, but suddenly I found myself looking at a program on the face on Mars.
Yeah.
And the face looked so human, and I also I wanted to write science fiction. And one of the plot things I was going to have was that people, what we call human, is actually found all over the stars, that we aren't just limited to Earth. And I thought that would be a really interesting, science fiction kind of thing, that the human race hadn't really evolved here completely, or if it had, it had actually evolved separately on other places, kind of in complete reversal of evolution, the way evolution thought. And so then suddenly I found myself staring at the face on Mars. So I worked with Vince DiPietro and eventually Dick Hoagland. And you must admit, we made that face on, I have to hand it to Dick Hoagland. He made that face as more recognized than George Washington on the dollar bill.
Yeah.
And at that time also I discovered I was working in Washington, D.C., and I discovered there was a UFO cover-up. In fact, I discovered that Mars had become part of the UFO cover-up, that the government did not want the face on Mars investigated. But let me put it this way. I also looked at the face on Mars and the pyramid, and we found two more faces on the far side of the planet. We'll talk about that some other time. But I realized, Mars looks like a planet that used to be like Earth. In fact, God forbid, if the Earth ever lost all its life and atmosphere, it would turn into a planet that looked like Mars. It would turn bright red because of the oxygen remaining in our soil. If you look at pictures of Earth from space, the places that are desert are bright red, just like Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere oxidizing the iron, so it turns it into a kind of rust-like substance called ferric oxide. And when lava comes out of a volcano, it's black. You look at the lava fields in Hawaii; they're all black rock. It's basalt. That's iron that hasn't been exposed to oxygen. It's called ferrous oxide, and then it gets exposed to oxygen in the air and turns bright red, from black to red, and becomes hematite, or what's called, it's taken from hemoglobin, like blood rock. And so Mars looks like a planet that used to have a lot of oxygen in its atmosphere. And so what had happened is, and it looks like it used to have water channels and even an ocean in the north. So Mars looks like a planet that used to be like Earth, supporting a lot of life. And I realized the face on Mars is the chief clue as to what Mars' past climate was like. It was like the Earth, assuming that somebody who lived on Mars was the ones who built the face. So what happened was then I went to a conference and presented a paper just on the Mars ocean. And believe it or not, everybody really liked it. And they don't ever give me any credit, but it's in the records that I was the first person to do this. And so the Mars ocean became official, an officially good idea after that. And I've been basically giving Mars papers ever since. And I would find one interesting issue on Mars, like how old was the surface of Mars.
Yeah.
And one thing you got to realize, Mike, the Mars science in general is very conservative, and it doesn't believe it or not, people think that science is about advancing continually in new ideas. Actually, science hates new ideas and resists them. You have to really, and the more important the new idea is, the harder they'll fight against it. These old graybeards and stuff like that. So what happened is that they accepted the ocean on Mars, and then we found out that the surface of Mars, everybody thought was like 3 billion years old.
Mm-hmm.
No, as it turns out, it's less. The average age of most of Mars, at least in the north, is less than 1 billion years old. And we know that now because we have Mars meteorites. And I was the first person to point out that because these meteorites they can tell the crystallization age when the lava of the Mars meteorites crystallized by, radioisotopes.
Yeah.
They figured out that all the Mars meteorites are about 1 billion years old or less. And that means the north part of Mars, which is the young part of Mars, is about that age. And that's much, much younger than anybody thought. And what that means is the old ocean on Mars is less than 1 billion years old. Mars had an ocean on its surface for most of Mars' geologic history, because the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And they found one Mars rock that's 4.5 billion years old. That's the same age as the Moon, by the way, and also meteorites. That's when the solar system formed. So Mars had an Earth-like climate probably for about 4 billion years, almost as long as the Earth. And that means there was life apparently flourished on Mars from very early. So Mars was like Earth for most of its history. That means anything like intelligent life could have evolved on Mars. So hence, there's a UFO cover-up.
Okay.
If the U.S. government knows that there are intelligent, living advanced civilizations out there in the stars, and some of them have visited us here, and that means the government kind of has an allergy. Because it's covering up that big secret, it has kind of an allergy about signs of intelligent life, especially that looks like us. They basically have made a decision that just not is that no government agency is going to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And we also found out that the enormous nuclear explosion that occurred on Mars. We found out that the U.S. government is not going to acknowledge that happened. Mars apparently had a very tragic. Mars is a place of great tragedy, apparently. Mars had a life with oceans and an oxygen atmosphere, and probably developed intelligent life that carved the faces. But Mars is next to the asteroid belt. So the first thing that apparently happened was Mars got hit with a big asteroid about the size that wiped out the dinosaurs on Earth. And that basically collapsed its climate. And then after that, now that happened, we estimate, about 500 million years ago. Then after that, about 200 million years ago, there was suddenly an enormous nuclear explosion on Mars. And that's very hard to figure out why that happened, or, in fact, I proposed a natural nuclear reactor. In Africa, there were natural nuclear reactors that ran for, they were about 1 billion years ago, and they ran there were very rich uranium deposits, and the water got in there and formed a natural nuclear reactor. But so I proposed that had happened on Mars, and that was a natural-sounding hypothesis, and it got my paper into the conference, which is what I wanted. And I actually even believed it for a while, but I don't really believe it anymore because that would have left an enormous crater. This explosion was so powerful. It was 1 million hydrogen bombs worth. And it devastated the entire planet. It raises a number of questions about who is the human race and where did we really come from? Are we really from this planet, or are we at least partially from some other place? because those people who carved that face on Mars, they sure did look like us, apparently. And so I would only be speculating. I suspect what we're going to find out is that there are a lot of people out there in the cosmos who look and act just like us. And that's going to be a big surprise. And by the way, life on Mars has basically been confirmed. Now, you're going to be hearing more about that in the next couple of weeks. And part of it is that the people down in Houston who work on that Mars rock, ALH 8401.
Yep.
They basically have now found that you can't explain what they found in this rock except with life. And they've basically proven that. It's basically little magnetic crystals that are formed by bacteria.
Yeah.
And they found the magnetic crystals, which are made of iron, even in rock that doesn't have any iron in it. It's like the little bacteria crawled up into cracks into pure limestone and died there. So life on Mars is basically been proven. This is life on Earth. And what it shows, by the way, Mike, and I'm going to get back to the human race here very quickly, but life on Mars apparently began almost immediately as soon as the surface cooled enough to have liquid water. And because the Mars rock they found is very old, it's 4.5 billion years old, and the life signs look like they're in rock that is only about 4.3 million years old. So it's very, very ancient life, very primitive. What happened now also is on Earth they found some very old rocks in Canada, and they're from almost 4.2 billion years old, and they show signs of life. And that means life on Mars and Earth started almost as soon as you had a ocean on both. As soon as you had liquid water, the planets formed, they were red hot, and then they cooled off, and then finally rains fell and formed an ocean on both of them. You had liquid water, and apparently as soon as you had liquid water on both planets, you had life. And this means that this whole idea of the life on Earth starting from primordial soup, and spontaneously organizing itself into cells and stuff, bacteria, that's basically been disproven. What people are going to realize is life on both Mars and Earth was seeded from space. This is called panspermia. In other words, life on Mars and Earth started so early, there's no way it could have actually spontaneously been generated here or on Mars. It had to come from outer space. And that means we live in a completely living cosmos.